So is the BWS turbo overhyped for the Focus ST? Watch this video and find out.
Hey there, pal.
Carbon fiber.
Cool.
What's up guys, I'm Alan with Edge Autosport, and this is a video that I've been wanting to do for a little bit, and I finally got a car on the dyno with the big wheel stock turbo. So this turbo came out a little while ago. It is basically a stock turbo with a slightly larger compressor wheel, so it can flow more pounds per minute per PSI than the stock turbo, but it uses the stock size turbine wheel and the stock exhaust housing. With that, there are some inherent issues, namely back pressure. So what I wanted to do is get a car on the dyno and find out where the benefits are with this turbo and if there are any. As you guys have probably seen on the Facebook pages, this turbo is getting raved about. So let's go ahead and start tuning it and find out if it is worth all the hype. Before we start tuning it, I do want to talk about this car a little bit. This car is, I think, one of the first Focus STs that I have ever tuned. It's owned by Lonnie Jackson here in Colorado, and he did not wash it for me for this video, so I'm very upset about that. But other than that, this is a really nice car. I originally tuned it on the stock turbo with the stock actuator, and I think like 2 years after that, I tuned it on the stock turbo with the upgraded Turbo Smart actuator. He ran on that for a couple years, and he's one of the highest horsepower cars with the stock turbo that I've had on the dyno. I think his best run that he's made on this dyno was like 309 wheel horsepower, and he backed that up on another local dyno too. So it's not just this dyno, it's also a Dynojet he made the same power, same torque as he did on our dyno Mike. Then a couple of years go by and he came in for a dyno day. We ended up having to put a new computer on our dyno. For our dyno computer, we had to get a new one. So I lost his old runs. But he came in for a dyno day, and I think it was after probably about a year, it might have been 2 years since I had tuned him on E30 with the Turbo Smart actuator, and he made 400 foot-pounds of torque and 292 wheel horsepower. So that's not bad to be pushing a stock turbo that hard for that much time and then come in and have only lost about 10 to 15 horsepower. I'm pretty happy with how this car has performed and held up over the years. With the big wheel stocker, we're gonna see what we can push that to on this car. He's still running the Turbo Smart actuator. We will also be running it on 91 and E30. Now that we have the introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and hop in this car and start turning it up and see what we can get out of it on 91 octane. Okay guys, that's gonna do it for 91 octane today. What I ended up doing is playing around with a couple different boost levels, different spark advance, some cam timing, and kind of found where this turbo likes to be. It definitely does make more power on the top end than the stock turbo. And in fact, we're sitting at, on the best run, we are sitting pretty close to his E30 numbers on 91 octane only. And I am only comparing to the last time he was on the dyno, not the first time where he made over 300 on E30. I'm talking about the last time he was on the dyno where he made 292. And so what we ended up at for the best pull that we got out of this thing was 363 foot-pounds of torque and 291 wheel horsepower on 91 octane, and that's 91 octane, not 93 octane. We were able to get to the stock turbo E30 numbers, which is pretty good. I mean, that's not bad for a $600 to $800 turbo setup. Unfortunately, I don't have previous 91 octane dyno numbers for this car to compare to, but once we go to E30, we'll do a little bit more comparison of the stock turbo. For boost on this car, the 363 torque one was the best I could get, and it was starting to get a little bit of knock in there, and so I think that's really kind of riding the 91 octane limit. It's gonna have to be pulled back by about 1 degree probably of timing to just really make it happy and consistent on the street. And that was done at 23 and a half pounds of boost, tapering off to about 16 pounds of boost up top. The low boost map that I created made 343 foot-pounds of torque and 286 horsepower. So really not all that much less horsepower. The torque is about 20 foot-pounds of torque lower though. So it does like the boost in the low end. I did try going up to 20 pounds of boost on the 91 octane map, on the high boost map, and it did not increase power. We stayed at the same power. In fact, we lost a little bit of power because it was knocking more. So I don't think in the upper RPMs, this turbo is going to like a lot of boost. Now, one of the things that has been raved about this turbo is that it will hold boost flat, and that is true. It will, like, I could get it to flatline at 20 pounds or flatline even at higher, like 22, 23 pounds of boost if I wanted to. The turbo would do it, but you're not actually getting power there. For one, you're increasing your back pressure, which is gonna make it more likely to knock, make it more likely to float some exhaust valves if you get too high on the back pressure. And two, it's just, the car's just not happy there. So tapering the boost off up top is the way to go with this turbo in order to prevent any issues like floating valves or running into where the car's just more knock happy. Oh, and by the way, the low boost map was at 20 PSI. So that's 343 foot-pounds of torque at 20 pounds of boost, tapering to about 16 pounds of boost up top. Now that we've done 91 octane, it's time to move on to E30. I am curious, we might be able to squeeze a little bit more boost out because we won't be knock limited. So I am hoping to see over 300 wheel horsepower with this setup and closer to 400 foot-pounds of torque. We are gonna be running into that fuel limit though in the low end just because the stock high pressure fuel pump can't keep up with the demand at that low RPM.
Could you not?
Civics are more important.
This guy thinks he owns the place or something like that.
He's over there putting LEDs on the Civic. I'm doing science here. All right, guys, so that's gonna wrap it up for both E30 and 91 octane. So I've already shared my thoughts on 91 octane. So let's take a look at some graphs here for the E30. What I have pulled up here is the stock turbo compared to the BWS turbo, both E30. As you can see, first off, the peak torque is a little bit higher on the stock turbo, but the stock turbo does spool just a little bit faster. That would explain why it's a little bit higher right there. It's just outspooling the BWS. Now, BWS quickly catches up to the stock turbo, and by 3,500 RPMs, they are pretty much dead even, and the BWS begins to take over at about 4,000 RPMs, and from there up, the BWS is just singing where the stock turbo starts to fall off. Peak numbers, we did make about 20 wheel horsepower over the stock turbo on E30. We ended up at 312 wheel horsepower to the stock turbo 291 wheel horsepower. But as you can see, as we go up higher in the RPMs, the BWS turbo does pretty much flatline at about 306. You can see the stock turbo just kind of dwindles away just a little bit up top. So the BWS is holding flatter at about, like in the upper RPM range, like above 6,000, we're at about 36 more horsepower over the stock turbo. So 30 to 40 more horsepower gain, that's pretty decent for a turbo that's less than $800. Now, is this a turbo that I would go out of my way to put on a Focus ST? Probably not, because it's really not that big of a difference over stock. You will notice the top end power, you will feel that on the road, but it's not like this earth-shaking improvement over the factory turbo. I would much rather put a bigger turbo on that's gonna give me another 100 horsepower if I'm gonna go through the effort of having to replace it. Now, if you have a stock turbo that is going out on you and you're gonna have to replace it, but you don't really care to do a big turbo setup, this might be the perfect option for you because it's cheaper than the OEM turbo for one thing, and it's gonna make about 30 more horsepower on the top end. You would need to get it tuned. You couldn't just put it on and go, but I mean, if you're having to switch out the stock turbo because it's going out on you, I mean, this would be a great one to replace it with and get a little bit more power while you're at it. That's my personal opinion after tuning it and seeing how it performs here. I should also mention real quick that we are at high altitude here, and this turbo, being that it is still a stock frame turbo with just a slightly larger compressor wheel, is going to struggle more here than it would at sea level. And that has a lot to do with the atmospheric pressure being so much lower. We're at about 12 PSI atmospheric pressure here, and at sea level it's 14.7. So we're down about 2.5 PSI right out of the gate. And the turbo has to overcome this in order to make power. That increases the pressure ratio that the turbo has to operate at to make the same amount of boost here as it would at sea level, and therefore heat goes up and everything else. So the turbo is struggling harder here to make this power than it would at sea level. And that may mean that at sea level, you could probably stretch this turbo a little bit further than you can here. I don't really know, haven't tuned enough of these cars yet, or had dyno results yet from sea level cars that I have tuned. So that will be something that we'll have to reserve judgment for, but these are the results that I have for now. I could keep rambling on forever about all the different things and my thoughts on this turbo, but I think I'll just let you decide for yourselves at the end of the day whether or not it's worth the hype, because it really just comes down to what do you want your car to be. And I want my car to be one thing, you might want it to be something different, so it comes down to personal choice. If you do decide to go with this turbo, be sure and let me know. I'd love to tune it for you, and you can pick up that e-tune on edgeautosport.com. I hope you liked the video, guys. Stay tuned to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, all that fun stuff. We'll catch you next time.